you're going to have to look at a point in time when you're going to have when you are revenue. You may not be making free profit, but you need to be post revenue.
Those multiples, are they based on comparables and like precedents, like transaction precedents before?
You can use both. So in this particular case, I just used sort of publicly listed ones, but it's actually very informative to look at acquisitions or transactions. The problem with transactions is that if you have a lot of the private companies don't reveal their revenues or earnings. So even if you know the company got sold for 200 million, you don't know what, you still can't calculate the ratio. Okay? That's the problem with it. But sometimes if you look long and hard, you can find that. Where do you get this kind of data from? Not Thomson 1. You don't have to go into Thomson 1, which is messy. This is stuff that you can get out of Capital IQ, which is probably the most popular one, or SDC. There's a couple of other databases. This data is much more readily available. Other questions? Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is, this is the exit value. What we now normally do, and it seems completely ludicrous the first time you do it, is you use these absolutely gigantic discount rates. You're discounting something by 50, 60% or something like that. And venture capitalists will talk about that. It's like, hey, we think this, and then we just discount the whole thing by 60% or 50%. This is weird because in any typical finance class, you might spend half an hour discussing whether the risk adjustment makes it 12 or 12.5%. So, you know, why on earth are we using these ridiculous discount rates? And the quick answer is, I've just given you an exit value if the company is successful. So I'm not going to look at an average scenario. I'm going to look at the success scenario. And the first thing you have to do is you have to sort of discount for the probability of failure. The chances are that I only have X% probability of really having that exit. And the simplest way of accounting for that is just slap a giant discount. In these slides, I go on a little bit about that because there is some issues. If you are a corporate finance person who enjoys doing numbers properly, this gives you shivers. But on the other hand, this is what a lot of people just do. So why do we use these discount rates? I discussed this in my slides, but the quick answer is it's not a great method for a corporate finance purist, but it is something that comes pretty close to what people do. In fact, I'll show you something that's even worse. So here is sort of, these are extracts from the spreadsheet. We're going to make that spreadsheet available. It's on my webpage anyway. So this spreadsheet helps you to just calculate these numbers. You don't have to do the number crunching yourself. You have to understand what the key inputs are, and then the spreadsheet does the rest of it. You can do this for multiple numbers. I won't do this one. I'll try to finish on the hour. One more model, model number 5. I've just given you a model in which I've taken an exit value, I've estimated the time to exit, and I've given you some ridiculous discount rate. It turns out that some investors, maybe the less sophisticated investors, or maybe the more intuitive investors, use a method that is simpler, even simpler than the one I've just given you. And one of the problems with the method I've just given you is it's very figure out what the right timing is, and these discount rates are arbitrary. So instead of using 2 arbitrary numbers, we're going to use 1 arbitrary number. And that's a cash-on-cash model. So here's the basic, mathematically what we're going to do is we're going to define m, the multiple, as 1 plus r to the t. So r was the arbitrary discount rate, t was the arbitrary time horizon. I'm just going to combine them into one number. The reason this is interesting is it's going to give you the simplest, most intuitive, but certainly not the most rigorous way of valuing a company. You're going to say, as an investor, this is a pretty risky deal. I need my money back 10 times. Okay, where does that number come from? I don't know. But I've heard many investors saying exactly that. They told me, in my business, if I put in money, I need to have the expectations that if things go well, I get my money back. Well, that's a multiple of 10. And what it means is that if I think this company, if it's successful, is going to be worth 250 million, and I need a multiple of 10, I'm going to value it today as 10 million. It can't get simpler than that. What I'm doing is I'm taking my estimate of the value, 250 million, and I'm saying it, I'm dividing it by 10. And what's the justification behind this? Well, here's a way of thinking about this. The method that I've given you before had a discount rate and a time horizon. So, let's take a 60% discount rate and suppose it takes 5 years. A 60% discount rate accumulated over 5 years gives you a multiple of 10.5. It turns out that, in fact, I can get the same thing with a 40% in a 7-year horizon. I get roughly the same number. So, in the multiple method, I'm not distinguishing between a world in which it takes 7 years and I need to discount at 40% versus a year of 5 years wait with a 60%. I'm just saying, based on the subjective risk that I'm of this investment, I think I need my money back. This is, you know, it shouldn't offend you if you're a corporate finance sort of geek, but on the other hand, that's just the way people do it. And so I want you to know, you know, I'm giving you a spectrum of methods, and you can choose which one you think is most appropriate for whatever the context is. There are better methods. What I've given you here, there are better methods, and there are ways, instead of sort of using this risk and just sort of waving my hands and saying, therefore I need a 50% discount rate or I need a 10x multiple, you could actually try to estimate the risk. There are various ways of doing that, and these, you know, there's a whole bunch of slides that go into that. I've actually developed one such method for which you can find the details on my website. It's called the Profix model, and it does a fairly explicit modeling of all these survival probabilities, so you can get rid of these crazy discount rates. Whether you find this helpful or not, I don't know. That's entirely up to you. You will find that you need more structure because you have to make a whole bunch of assumptions, simple assumptions, but you need to make them, and then you know you can go through the details of what this Profix does. A couple more words. You can use much more complicated models. Some people like to use option models. All very nice. I don't think you're going to go there. One of the things that this method has not emphasized is debt and how to value debt. There's a whole class of corporate finance models that tell you how to value debt. That's complicated. In the startup context, it's often not such a big deal, and so we kind of just sort of typically shove that away. There is something else, though, that's going on in the startup world, and that's that we don't typically, it's not true that we're using equity. Typically, we're using preferred shares, convertible preferred shares, participating convertible shares, with a cap, without a cap, redeemable, not I mean, these things actually turn out to be sort of a much more complicated contract, and we completely simplify that. So when you, for evaluation purposes, we typically just ignore this. I think it's a pity, but it's the reality. In your negotiations, however, you probably want to come back to this and think about, maybe if you're an investor, putting in a little twist and putting, you know, some additional terms that you think are important, or as an entrepreneur, you want to push back on all the unreasonable stuff that the investors have put into new term sheet. That's a game that entrepreneurs and investors play in the real world. No reason that you should shy away from playing the same game. Conclusion, valuation matters for ownership stakes. That's why we care, because it's an essential component of our negotiation. Actual bargaining is determined by competition, bargaining power. You need a story, something to justify a valuation. Many prefer really simple and crude models. Given the extreme uncertainty that you're living in, there is something to be said about the simplicity. It gives you transparency and sophistication often requires so many assumptions that can't be justified that the improvement that you get from a complex method isn't always there. But everyone will tell you it's evaluation, it's not a science. The reason it cannot be a science is that we have some fundamental uncertainty that is often even hard to quantify, and so evaluations is never going to give you precise answers because there are no objective, measures of the uncertainty that you would need to do that. Okay. Try to be short, brief, and sweet. Questions?
Is there any IRR targets?
What?
Rate of return.
Sorry?
Internal rate of return targets.
Yeah, so the discount rate that I talked about is an IRR target. Those are IRRs. And so when the VCs say we're typically looking at a 40% IRR, that's the same thing as saying we are using a 40%. That's the same thing, exactly. What else? I'm sure I've overwhelmed you a little bit. That's inevitable because you're dealing with something that's slightly, complex. These slides should get you a long way. Wikipedia and the internet will probably fill in the rest. Let me know how else I can help you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And now let's have Peter.
It's a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah, actually?
No, I don't know if you planned it.
Oh, no, we could. Does anyone need a break? It's 2 minutes? We good? Do we need to discuss? Okay.
There's a lot of questions. Usually people after. Okay. So I'm glad Professor Hellman went first, so I know that there's not much of an overlap. Otherwise, you guys would be Otherwise, you guys would. So before we start, I just want to know if you feel uncomfortable disclosing your secret, right? What your project is. But just to show of hands, how many are doing mobile app related things? Don't be shy. I know this should be 1 or 2 at least. No? None? Any internet and media based technology? None? Or everyone just don't want to disclose anything at all? We're too busy, didn't start yet? Well, it's okay. So I've tailored this a little bit towards technology because I know from past years that's tend to be what people do. So it would be interesting to answer some of your earlier questions as well. So first, the broad objectives. I think doing this, because it's in a presentation, a competition stage, you want to win, right? So how do you win? Well, one is they're the judges, but they're also the negotiation teams. So be strategic about your audience. And I think a couple of objectives, this is just my opinion, right? That may work, is you really want to try to get the message across. You can do a fantastic job using real options, really complicated things, but if your audience doesn't understand, think about the other team or even the judges. I can tell you some of the judges don't know what that method is, right? So if the message doesn't come across or they don't understand it, they won't appreciate the complexity, and you will, it's harder for them to accept the good part of your ideas. So the second thing is, if you can simplify, then simplify. Take it a simple approach. And I'll show you in a minute of some of my suggestions of how you can do that. And put yourself in the other person's shoe. Right? If you're an investor, what would you want to do? Right? If you're putting your own hard-earned cash in, so that's why people talk about skin in the game. Right? That's why investors, entrepreneurs, they invest more entrepreneurs who put money with them. Because if you're also invested, you'll think like an investor as well, and make sure that everybody cashes out the same way, or everybody earns money together. So put yourself in the other side and think, okay, what is the best way for everyone to win, right? To make it a win-win situation. So I put this here because I thought I was going first. So this is what not really a good idea to do. This is a valuation for a public company. It's based on some kind of NPV discount rate. And just to show you, and Professor Hellman did mention that, if you look at that beta, right, all these inputs, lots of assumptions, and it's very, very wobbly. So you change a little bit, it changes the whole thing completely. That's why it's not advisable in this particular early stage. Even a public company, sometimes you think, well, they actually don't really mean anything, right? You just do it because on the theoretical basis, they make a lot of sense. But I have to tell you, how many times that good investors, if you think of Warren Buffett, how many times he actually would sit down and say, I believe my model, and this is what is my offer. Right? So if you just look at that beta, that's actually from a bottom-up data approach. It's really complicated, taking the weighted average of different industries, different competitors, and then making sure there's a beta, and then you use the kappa. So we don't, it's not practical to use that method, but it's a good cross-check. So if you are keen on using an NPV analysis showing your presentation, I think that's okay. But just know that this complicated approach is mainly for yourself, that you know as an entrepreneur in the real world, how much do you think it's really worth? But negotiation and presenting to investors is another story. So next we go to what I call, and many people call, back of the envelope test. And so if you know a little bit about investment banking, the famous, I forgot the name of the company, but just some famous telecom deal was negotiated based on a piece of paper and they just dropped a few lines on it, right? Two CEOs just sat down and then negotiated on a piece of paper and they shook hands. So that actually does happen. It's not a it's not a fictitious story, I hope. And so the key takeaway is simple things and how people negotiate is based on really simple and easy to understand metrics. So the first one is to understand really what are the drivers for your business. So if you're internet-based, which I think most of yours would be, but I don't know if it is. So the pay-per-click, click through, all these are drivers, right? They're sort of mixed in there somehow, and you can Google online. I won't bore you with details because every business is different. If you're doing some clean tech, there's obviously drivers for yours. But I'm just using this as an example, right? Number of impressions. So you can have a simple calculation. What comes down to it is profit. How much money are you making? How much money are you making from the top line? How much revenue are you making? Then how many users do you have, right, per user revenue? And then how much money, what is your cost? So simple things, keep it simple. And it comes down to margin, because margin gives you the income and profit that ultimately will give you your valuation. So it doesn't matter what method you use from Professor Hellman's methodology, which model you use. You need some form of valuation that has some base data, right? Whether it's a multiple of revenues, or you use the full MPV model to value the company. You still need the cash flow, right? Or you're basing it on number of users, which, to answer your question, in the absence of even revenues, how do you tell how many, how do you do evaluation? Well, sometimes the industry average, you look to the far right, is $25 to $50 per user, and that's, sometimes acquisitions go for that level. So you can do your search, and the internet's available to you, and see what the recent transactions have been in your space, and what kind of valuation that the media, they would say, okay, it's X number per user, or in the clean energy, I don't know, oil and gas is whatever the output, right? So, and then also this 2 times revenue is not just a random number, it's kind of consistent between 1 or 2 times, 1 for a mature company, 2 times revenue for growth, a lot higher for things like the internet space. And so you have some kind of multiple there. And to get to the valuation stage, these base data is really about how you articulate. And so in terms of the negotiation, and Professor Hellman put up a great point, is nobody would believe what you say. Whatever you put on it could be a fancy projection of the future, but it is the future. And none of you would have that business yet, as of yet. So you can't say, we have this patent, this patent pending, we filed it, and we did the market research, we can generate X number of dollars. So absent of that, you have to think, again, thinking the other side. So what is the investor going to think? They're going to doubt every number you put on there. So what is the best way that you can communicate with them? It's not about convincing them at one point. It's about recognizing that they have different set of values. They have different beliefs, right? You may say, I can get to, 1 million users in a year. Well, they say, no, I think based on my belief, it's about half of that. Right? So these are fundamental differences. And rather than argue for it, you can put up a graph. And this is actually based on the target price, like a stock price. I just throw it on there, but this is the idea of a sensitivity table. But you can use it for anything. And instead of target price, whatever's in the middle should be your input. So if you see the last part, right, these key valuation base data, because those are the things you have you have arguments about. So revenue could be based on the total revenue. If you're doing a multiple on revenue, it could be based on how many number of users you have, or the rate of growth of users, or the amount of revenue you can charge per user. So in this sense, okay, if the investor says, well, this is all good, I love your story, I love your team, it's all checked out, but coming to negotiation, what is your valuation? They say, well, I don't believe you can achieve the number of users and the user growth. The user growth rate, right? Year-on-year user growth rate. But your revenue projection per user, that checks out. So I think that's believable. So you say, okay, well let's put that aside, use that number, and then you put up two matrices, two x and y, and that's the two variables that you two have disagreement on. And basically you wrote down, it's very similar to that sensitivity analysis on the discount rate and multiple. So here you just say, okay, whatever input this, I believe I'm at this point, so I think the base data, right, the total revenue is at a certain number, and let's put on a multiple. So the multiple, then you go to the media and say, well, recent transactions have been this and that. So that's why we're doing it. So, but be creative about what you put in and make it make sense. And this is a very easy way to show the audience. Absent of complicated analysis, it's nothing they can relate to, right? Simple inputs, and everybody could understand, okay, per user and number of users gets you whatever the end result is. And so my presentation has reached, so this is the last time. So any alternative method is, I think Professor Hellman mentioned a few preferred shares. So one is quite common these days, but it's not appropriate for this scenario because of the structure of the competition. It's going to make your life not very easy if you do the convertible route, because it's just too complicated. You have to get into, well, how much is it really worth as a part debt, and how much of a guarantee. It looks fancy, but in terms of practicality, it's not that useful. And it's usually used in, and some people choose to use it. It depends on the type of investor. Usually the very early rounds, that maybe one of your close family members say, okay, well, I believe your story, but I also want some kind of guarantee, so can I earn a little bit of interest at the same time? So it acts kind of like debt, but it's really lovely at their time. But what's increasingly popular is this sometimes less talked about. Is this maybe you and have more experience on that, being closer to the industry? Is sometimes this there's an advisor round, and this is quite common in the Silicon Valley. That is getting common. That they just instead of putting on a valuation, instead of actually negotiating a valuation, they say, well, okay, well, put in 50,000, right, or some X amount. And usually that amount is kind of just random for incubators. They say, well, every company that comes in, we just give 50,000. So it's a random number, so they start with that. But they say, okay, based on negotiation, we'll put on a discount to the next Series A. So you don't even know if that company will get to Series A, but they say, well, come on board to our incubator complex, move to the US, but we'll give you this money so you can move over. But we get a discount for your next fundraising. So that's kind of, perhaps not for the context of competition. It really depends on how the structure. I haven't seen the case guidelines, but just letting you know that's because obviously all of you are here because you're interested in perhaps starting your own business. Just letting you aware that's out there. So look into it and you know about it. If you happen to have an angel investor approach you, say, hey, I have connections with Y Combinator or some other incubator. If you want to interview with them and get you in, so to know that this is the process and do a little bit of research. And what is common and also has been around for a while is contingent on milestones. And this is a good one because then you can actually perhaps work into your case is that, this is thinking about the other side, right? The other investors don't believe, or US PEs or VCs, you don't believe the entrepreneurs. You're saying, well, how do I know you're going to achieve such and such? And there's so many contingencies that you're telling me that you're going to file the patent, that the FDA is going to prove this, prove that, or you're going to get certain licensing, or even by completing your basic website on time. These are milestones, they're very important events for a company, but not necessarily achievable in the amount of time that the entrepreneurs typically promise. So in that sense, you can make your investment into a company contingent on achieving certain milestones. So, okay, the total committed capital is X, and you talk about the valuation, right, the percentage. But then you say, well, the first part, it would be this amount, right, up front, but the next part will be contingent on you achieving certain things. And then when to choose what method, it's really about knowing your audience. Again, the one key takeaway is think from the other side, and that's going to win the competition because you can resonate with the judges or they can with you, and certainly both teams knowing what the other person is thinking, or at least be empathetic and thinking, well, okay, if I were sitting on the other side of the table, what would be my consideration, and then address those in your presentation. So I think that these are just some suggestions that that I think can really help you in your case competition. So any questions? All right.
We'll have Ewan, who comes from an entrepreneurial background, so maybe.
Can I pull up a website on you?
Yeah, no problem.
Ewan has an iPhone 5 cable. I might need one halfway through. Oh, fantastic, my best friend. Lifesaver. Speaking of good business ideas, if anyone is working on battery packs, I'm the best. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I'll get back to you. I have some notes online. They have it on Friday. Start talking in the background here while I try to pull up my notes. So who here is interested in starting companies in general? I guess. Cool, some. And then, so the rest are interested in doing finance and DC, I suppose. Cool. And no one's really interested in internet technology, I guess? Or did I get the wrong impression from what?
Or they won't tell you until we see the case.
Okay, because I only know about internet technology, so I'm going to be pretty useless for everything else. So, a bit about myself while I try to pull up my stupid little notes. So, I was a CS undergrad at Cornell. I went off to law school because I couldn't think of anything better to do. Bad mistake. I worked in Wall Street as a lawyer for 2 years, and on nights and weekends I started my first company, which was a vacation rental website in New York. And I exited that right before I even finished quitting my firm. And then I had so much fun that I moved over to Silicon Valley and somehow got in touch with the Y Combinator folks. They funded my first company, which is actually the one I'm still working on. So it's been a wild kind of 3 years from raising a seed round to moving the company from Silicon Valley to Vancouver last year. We're mobile games, but the company is called Oxy. And hopefully I can type this. This is the most efficient way I can think of to bring up my notes. And no. It's going. So what I'm going to chat about today is a bit more. Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's it. It's nothing huge. Generating ideas. This is like the fun talk. So it's really easy for me to talk about. This is what I do most of my time when I'm awake. So what I'm trying to give you here is a general, some questions to ask yourself. And when thinking about coming up with new business ideas or evaluating something that's being pitched to you, a lot of the way we think as human beings is really model-driven. We look, whether or not we know it or not, we look towards previous things that we've experienced or seen and try to draw some intuition or gut instinct from that. So, I mean, the first, so what I try how I try to evaluate business models is I apply a series of questions. So, and different ways of looking at a single problem. the first way I try to look at it is this a personal itch, I ask myself. Is this my own personal itch or a personal itch of someone in that industry? And this goes along the lines of intuition and prediction. Some of the more famous examples comes from Jack Dorsey, the CEO of, I guess, the founder of Twitter, and now the founder of Square. When coming up with the idea for Twitter, Jack actually was obsessed over this messaging system. He worked in a few different transit type companies, and all he could think about all day was the way that, I don't know, he's weird, but he really was fascinated by the way that simple short messages were broadcast and received by other people. So this was a system used by, I guess, emergency dispatch systems, and this was the genesis of how he blew up Twitter into a huge company. Nobody else had the same passion for messaging systems. So Uber, the car company, which I think was recently banned in Vancouver or something, came out of a conference in Paris where 3 entrepreneurs couldn't find a taxi cab, and they were so annoyed that they were sitting out there and couldn't get a cab in the cold. And so they were like, hey, why don't we just order a bunch of black cars and hire some drivers and make them our own personal drivers. So that was the genesis of Uber. And I mean, the granddaddy of them all is really Facebook. Facebook is a great story. So I was in college when Facebook came out in 2004, and let me tell you, every conversation, every dining table, I've never seen anything like this, was about Facebook. You know, it was, and Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook out of a personal desire for something he wanted it to exist. And I mean, he looked at some other broken models. The school itself had tried to start a directory of sorts, and he could never find his friends' phone numbers. And he wanted to know, the girl sitting next to him in class, what her name, what was the deal. So that was a huge personal itch kind of business that really blew up. So another way to really evaluate and try to expand upon ideas is observing the user. You put something out there and you see how people interact with it. And sometimes they use it in really weird, unexpected ways, because users are just weird sometimes. One of the example I like to bring up here is with Groupon. So when Andrew Mason came up with Groupon, it was actually more of a social movement type website. He wanted to promote the idea of collective action. The example being, we're all little people, and say we all hate our cell phone provider, like AT&T. We're all little people and we can't do anything about it, because even if we complain, we write an email, AT&T is going to ignore us. So he thought, hey, why don't we start a website where we can pool our collective efforts to go make a huge change. So he started this thepoint.com, and it's pretty hilarious. It's based out of Chicago. He made this website called thepoint.com, and one of the campaigns was trying to build a dome over the city of Chicago because it was too cold. He made some ridiculous campaigns. But in doing this wild and wacky experiment, he noticed that people really use the platform. The most usage of the platform came out of buying cheap stuff. What you know today as the Groupon that went huge and went IPO was just this weird use case of his more generic platform. And he just saw this, oh wow, people are using my product this way. Maybe I should, maybe we should make this the central focus of our business. So he did. Instagram was also came out of a weird use case of a game, actually. I mean, the two founders were originally trying to make this HTML5 type game where people checked into places or did a whole bunch of stuff, and along the way they also took photos. And then he gave it to some friends, and I guess the only thing that people liked was the photo part of it. So he just kept doubling down on that one feature, and he just threw away the rest, and they had an amazing product. One really applicable way of evaluating an idea is, one I really like, is observing what's changing in the landscape around you. As an entrepreneur, as a startup, you're an ant. You're a tiny little ant. It's really hard for you to affect change the world, unless you're, and we'll get to this later, unless you're one of the founders of Google, where you come up with just tremendous technological breakthrough. Usually you're trying to rely on riding on the waves of others, riding on the waves of the changing technological landscape. So I like to think about this as like a volcano. Something's changing in the world, and while that change is underway, there's going to be so much opportunity. And it's going to be wild and wacky, but there's going to be lots of new businesses that come up, because there's no established processes, there's no laws sometimes, and there's really interesting opportunity. So smartphones is one. I mean, it's a pretty established market. today, but when it first came out, it was when the app stores first came out, it was a free-for-all, and certainly smartphones have kind of embedded itself into every aspect of our lives, emulating different functions that we used to use like hardware for. Wearable technologies coming out. We see watches, the Pebble, we see the Google Glass. I'm not a huge fan, but I could be wrong. I think it's still early days, but we see it's an interesting platform for new things to get built on. And obviously for those in finance, one that I'm really personally bullish on, we see the Bitcoin economy taking rise right now, and that can give birth to a whole new sort of types of finance that we haven't seen before. X for Y. I also like this one. It's promoting your idea, thinking about your idea as a version of one idea, but in a different space. So, have you guys heard of the Airbnb.com, the vacation rental marketplace? That's a fantastic X for Y. I mean, people use it as the X in the X for Y things a lot in the Valley. The Airbnb for dogs. There is one, and they're actually a pretty successful company. You can give someone your pet to take care of for like a couple of weeks here on vacation. This whole like decentralized marketplace model of Airbnb has been cloned multiple times in different sectors. Fast following products. So what you would term or sometimes degrade as mere copycats. It's actually pretty interesting, I find. So the way I try to think about these types of ideas of businesses is looking at one sector and trying to apply the same idea somewhere else. And that drum might be a geographical drum. Like, is something working really well in China? Is there something really well? Oh, it's usually the other way around. Someone in China is going, is there something working in the US that I can bring over? And it's actually not, it sounds sometimes easier than it looks. I read a cool article saying that, we're really terrible at imitating as human beings, so feel free to imitate, because every time you try to imitate something, you end up actually imparting your own ideas, whether you're trying to or not. You necessarily have to try to, you're necessarily going to change the idea to fit where you're importing it to. I mean, certainly I don't envy the challenge of some Chinese companies like Baidu, the Chinese version of Google. When they built a search engine in China, it's a totally different business because they're dealing with certain regulations and stuff that Google never had to deal with. So on the surface, sometimes it seems easy, but it's not. I mean, fast-following company Zynga is one of the known fast-following companies. I mean, their success now is somewhat questionable, but certainly, I mean, getting to an IPO is a success of its own, and they're known as a company that almost at its core is a fast-following company. They scientifically break down top-grossing products that competitors do. They reverse engineer and essentially build what you would term clones of them, right? So that's an interesting way to kind of judge ideas. And then the last part, is the most exciting, is that if you really can come up with a breakthrough, but the 10x part is the big kind of factor there. Usually it's not often good enough to come up with a 10%, 1.1x better solution to an established market. If you want to come up with a better solution, you better be the Google. You better be so good, so fast, so cheap, or something that will really let you win the marketplace. So that's some of the frameworks that I think about when coming up with ideas. Questions. So these are actually from the Y Combinator application. Y Combinator is a small incubator down in Silicon Valley. They work with 20-something, 30-something young founders with about 30 companies a class or more sometimes. And Paul Graham is a very down-to-earth kind of guy, and it's really helpful when thinking as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you get too caught up in trying to promote your idea that you lose track of the basic fundamentals. And this is, it's one thing to be pitching the idea, to a VC. It's another to test your idea against the market. And then when testing against the market is very honest. If you're skipping over a basic question, if there's a basic flaw in your business, it's not going to work. So the questions I see here are actually from the Y Combinator application. They're very simple. It asks you, very clearly, what are you going to make? So the one example I like to refer to in Dropbox, the file sync company, has its original 2000 and circa 2007 Y Combinator application out on the web. It's great. It's a fantastic look back at what Drew Houston identified as problems in the marketplace and what he fixed and what he adhered to in building this awesome company. So, when in answering that question back in the day, he said he wanted to build Dropbox, which is a product that syncs files across computers. Super simple. Like if you can, the elevator pitch is something that entrepreneurs always talk about. I mean, if you really don't have time in front of investors, in front of users mostly. Users are busy; they don't really care about what you're building unless you can solve a real problem. So okay, fine. If I'm back in the day in 2005, I had different computers, syncing files to computers. Good, cool. I'll listen. So what's new? In the 2007, before Dropbox came out, there were different types of file syncing solutions. They were generally web-based. You had to drag and drop your files online, or there were different backup solutions. But no one did them both. No one did them both well. So sometimes you would sync to your different computers, but there wouldn't be no backup solution. And also notice that in the Dropbox context, there was a changing technology shift. People were buying more and more computers. I mean, in the mid-2000s, you would have one desktop computer, maybe a family or something. But we're getting to a point where people have smartphones, 2 laptops, and we have all these devices that you want to access your media from. So, what do you understand that you don't get? That was a typo. What do you understand that competitors just don't get? Is the question really? What's special? What's unique about your offering? What special insight do you have that that other people are not going to have? And I mean, in the Dropbox context, what he recognized were people were just working